All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about Catholicism and the problem of God. What an interesting and provocative title that is, and indeed it is the title of Dr. Mark Spencer's new element. So I love these elements. I think that they're often just really great, handy introductions to a lot of just interesting topics in philosophy. I find myself grabbing a ton of them. And every so often, it's really cool because they'll just make a whole bunch of them free, and you can just download a whole bunch of them. And in fact, yours was free for a while, so I took advantage of that. And of course, I sent you a note and say, "Hey, let's discuss this on the podcast." So here we are. Thanks for being with me again, Mark.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So give us a little background on this project. What inspired this project? What is it about? And then we can just kind of dive into different aspects of it from there.
Sure. So as you said, there's this large series that Cambridge University Press puts out, the Cambridge Elements series, and it's a sort of series of introductions to all sorts of topics, not just in philosophy, but in a lot of different areas. And this one specifically in the Problems of God series, which is a series, I think it's going to be ultimately like 80 volumes, 80 distinct elements. And they're all centered around different philosophical and theological problems that have to do with God. And they're going to cover a variety of religions. So I know there's Eastern Orthodoxy in the problem of God, and Protestantism in the problem of God are forthcoming. But there's also one on Hinduism and one on Islam. And then they've got a bunch on, problems of God and evolution and problems of God and quantum mechanics, all sorts of philosophical and theological problems that have to do with God. So I was invited to write the one on Catholicism. So it's really a very big overview. It's an overview of really what I take to be the core philosophical and theological problems that have to do with God that have arisen in the Catholic tradition.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the Catholic tradition is huge and has been around for 2,000 years. And so there's no way in a volume of 70 pages, whatever this is, to cover all that much.
Yes.
So this is really an introduction.
Yeah.
I take to be the main core problems having to do with God in Catholicism.
Let's so that's great. Thank you. That's a really helpful summary. And I also want to note that while these elements are meant to be introductory, they're not lame, if I could just put it like that. Like, they often do go into a great amount of depth, and they're very engaging. So I just would invite everybody to check them out. They're really well done, at least the ones that I've seen. So, Mark, what problems do you think are uniquely Catholic? And by that I mean is, as somebody who kind of converted to Catholicism, from a naturalism, but first just like a broad philosophical theism. It was sort of obvious to me, like, hey, if I make this move, and I thought I had good reasons to make the move, there's got to be some issues or tensions here that, like, I just don't have as a broad philosophical theist, because I'm taking on more commitments, right? Now, some of those tensions are obviously not just Catholic. I think tensions with the God of classical theism and incarnation. Obviously, that's something that's shared among many Christians, but it's even wider than that. One of my closest friends is Hindu, and he has an incarnational theology. It's just wider. It's just wider than the Catholic one. So, like, he's still got that problem, if I may put it that way, right? So, yeah, I'll put that out to you and let you respond however you.
Yeah, I think that's well put. That the incarnation that's a problem that sort of spans across a number of different religions. In Christianity, so to sort of narrow down a little bit, in Christianity, and then I'll get to Catholicism more specifically. We've got this sort of additional problem, I think, with respect to the incarnation, which is that, so on the one hand, we've got the God of classical theism, and that's explicitly upheld by the Christian tradition, and I think very explicitly upheld by the Catholic tradition. Yep. Maybe more clearly so than some things that have been said in Eastern Orthodoxy and Protestantism.
Yeah, I agree.
And then not just sort of an incarnational theology, but that God has become incarnate in one specific human being at a specific point in history, a specific place and time. So that great particularity of Christianity, I think, introduces some interesting problems. And in the book, the way I set this up at the beginning is I see Christianity as, philosophically speaking, theologically speaking, arising out of these twin inheritances from Greece and Judaism. And you've got the sort of emphasis in Judaism on God has called a particular people at a particular place and time. And that all culminates on the Christian account in Christ, right? And then from Greece, we have the inheritance of classical theism. And Christianity is trying to bring these two together. And then I see that sort of tendency, that desire to bring together what might at first look like disparate ways of looking at things. I see that repeated again and again throughout the Catholic tradition, where we want to affirm, say, both a strong view of providence and human free will,
right?
Where we want to be able to draw on the inheritances of all different cultures. Like Catholicism, I think, has been uniquely effective at putting Christianity into the terms of various cultures, while still retaining this strong inheritance from Greece and Judaism, and this strong commitment to sort of the unique revelation of God in Christ.
Yes.
So I see that as sort of a big part of the sort of unique problems and also unique greatness of Catholicism.
Yeah, I agree. That's great, and that's helpful. Yeah, especially the particularity aspect. You know, who was, I think it was Newman, right? Who said something like, "Hey, you know, the options to me are like Catholicism or atheism," and wasn't it C.S. Lewis who said the options to me are Christianity or Hinduism? I guess I'm between the two. Like for me, it's like it'd be Catholicism or Hinduism is kind of how I feel, because even before I became Catholic, you know, as I sort of moved away from atheism, I was really attracted, like just intellectually, to sophisticated forms of religious pluralism. And you're right to point out, it seems like, okay, if you're going to make that move, not just to Catholicism, but Christianity too, absolutely, to be fair, is like, okay, it's not that you just assume a problem with incarnational theory, because if you're a student of other religions, you realize there is incarnational theory in other religions. This is not just a particularly Christian thing. What you pick up is the tension of, if you think it is a tension of particularity, right? That having to exclude other claims of, you know, God incarnating and revealing himself. I don't know. Any further thoughts you have on that would be appreciated. Again, no agenda here. It's just kind of fun to think about. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting you say about reminding me of that thing that Lewis said about the Christianity and Hinduism being sort of the two live options. People have sometimes asked me, like, if you weren't going to be Christian, what would you be? And I answer generally sort of philosophical Hindu or philosophical Neoplatonist.
Yeah, I'm with you.
With sort of with religious practice, you know, added in.
Totally.
But I see those as sort of versions of the same thing in a sense. So sort of this you know, philosophically sophisticated account of the hierarchy of the cosmos, and a commitment to there being, in some sense, a one or a Brahman, right? A sort of ultimate source of all things, but that ultimate source is also sort of irreducibly plural. That there are many gods that are manifestations of the one, or presences of the one, and that those make themselves present in various ways in creation. There's something really philosophically attractive.
It's the great chain of being, right? Yeah,
and it's experientially attractive. Like in some ways, that's kind of the way the world shows up for me. Like there are all these different sort of theophanies, like, you know, presences of God in the beauty of nature and the beauty of human love, and the, you know, all these different.
Yeah, I'm into that. Right.
And then, Christianity adds this additional claim, not necessarily exactly to deny all those transcendences. So a Christian, I think, can affirm, God does reveal himself through nature and through aspects of human life and so forth. But all of those revelations are sort of relativized by this one definitive revelation.
Yeah.
And they all have to be subordinated to Christ. And that's the sort of distinctive thing about Christianity. That is not just sort of particular, general, philosophically or rationally accessible, experientially accessible theophanies, but that in a total way God has become present in this one man, Jesus Christ.
And do you think, like, what is so there's two ways you can approach this sort of project, especially if somebody already is Catholic. One is you can just provide a defense, right? And you can say, look, you're already Catholic. Here's some problems. Here's why none of these problems are of sufficient force that it should cause you to question or abandon your belief. And that's it. Of course, the other more aggressive approach is to actually try and motivate the truth of it, right? So I'd just be, curious in terms of, those additional claims. Well, I guess what sort of project are you more? I'm sure you're interested in both, right? But what are you more up to generally? Are you more up to the defenses of saying, "Hey, if you've already got this commitment for for whatever reason, here's why you shouldn't give it up because of these arguments," or do you think you have some good arguments for the befittingness of those additional? Because honestly, that's kind of what moved me, right? Especially like, these are additional claims, additional specifications, additional commitments. But dang, they just seem to fit so well, right? With these kind of prior philosophical commitments that I just find myself really attracted and wanting to pick them up, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the project that I'm particularly interested in. Maybe not so much in this element that I wrote here. This really is a sort of overview of the main problems. And really here I want to make people sort of aware of the great variety of views that are contained within the Catholic tradition on philosophical problems, on spirituality, on mysticism, things like this. I've got a bunch of sections on these different things. I think Catholics sometimes view their tradition as kind of monolithic, and I want to sort of show that there's a great variety of views available, and that's part of the strength of the Catholic tradition is this range of views, and the sort of fruitfulness of working through the tensions between these has really sort of moved the Catholic tradition along and led us to a deeper understanding of God. But in my sort of broader thinking and broader scholarly project, I'm interested in, showing the fittingness of Christianity, and especially in the sense of I want to show how Christianity fulfills and sort of renders more intelligible those other claims, those claims we were just talking about classical theism, about the many theophanies of God, many manifestations of God that people experience. I'd like to show how Christianity does not require us to deny any of those experiences or any of the genuine philosophical conclusions we reach through that kind of reasoning, but explains them all much better and puts them in a much more coherent, fitting context.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you to give us a sketch of that here in a minute, but I'll just again kind of speak from experience. For me, again, kind of coming from a naturalistic perspective, there was so much that was attractive about a sort of traditional Christianity and Catholicism. One is like, I guess as I began to change my mind, and this maybe just always helpful psychologically or rhetorically, I didn't have to like think that I was stupid in the sense that like, oh, okay, so this is how you guys think about God. This is the kind of what I was rejecting before, like I can still reject that, right? Like those were like crude anthropomorphisms, and I think I still had good reasons to reject it. But now I have this new perspective on the divine, on the transcendent, that offers a robust explanatory framework that seems to solve issues that I, for the life of me, could not solve from within naturalism. And that was like just really helpful to me. But then as I was also getting, interested in religious pluralism, I remember I was reading just all sorts of stuff from different traditions and thinkers like Aldous Huxley, his book, The Perennial Philosophy. Even when I looked at Christianity, it offered what you just said. It's like, oh, okay, I don't have to like get rid of all this stuff that did seem to make sense to me, right? And in fact, I can now situate it in a wider framework and a wider worldview where it's actually more richly illuminated.
Yeah.
If that, do you agree with that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Christianity comes in all sorts of flavors, and Catholicism comes in all sorts of flavors, and there are some that strike me as sort of offering a very narrow worldview, not to disparage anyone's version of Christianity, but there are some that just strike me as
I'm with you though, right?
Narrow. I'm thinking of various forms of Protestant fundamentalism, for example. But there are sort of Catholic analogs of these.
Yeah, to be fair, for sure.
That
Right.
that do not offer an explanatory framework that allows us to integrate everything that we experience, everything that we know from the sciences. I don't mean scientific interpretations of that, but the genuine results of scientific observation and theorizing, that require these sort of fundamentalisms that require us to reject a lot of that. And what we're left with is something that looks a lot like a conspiracy theory. Right? Like God has given us.
Yeah, I'm with you. Something with the appearance of, something that isn't real, right? Yeah, I'm with
Yeah,
you. Right. Uh-huh.
yeah, and it's hard to sort of square that view with um, any sort of a view where we would take reasoning seriously.
Yeah, I'm with
Right?
you.
Like if I were a Calvinist about sort of human nature, and I thought, yeah, just human nature is just irredeemably fallen unless there's some sort of miraculous intervention. It's totally fallen in the sense of total corruption of reason, total corruption of will. Well, then I might say, yeah, like everything that has come about as a result of human reasoning, every culture's view, every philosophical conclusion, all scientific reasoning, it's all just corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
I need to reject it. The problem with those sorts of views is they're self-undermining, right? If my reason is corrupt, then I don't have any reason to trust it when I trust Christianity, right? Because I grasp those claims with my reason.
Yeah, you're sawing off the branch you're sitting on, type of deal, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Catholicism, just sort of the rich tradition of Catholicism offers this view that lets us see how all of those things fit together, and are explained by, right, the natural causes of the world are ultimately explained by this first cause, which is causality itself and intelligibility itself, and allows us to really understand the intelligibility of the world in a much richer way without denying any of the things that we know by reason.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, I'm in agreement with all of that. So maybe we can move to more of some of the specifics, and I want to make sure we get on to something we discussed off air about the importance of situating even devotional and liturgical practices in a philosophical discipline. We'll get there in a minute, but one of the things that comes up again, I don't think this is Catholic specific. However, the deeper you get into Catholic understandings of atonement and grace and freedom and justification, it does become more specific. And I have not picked your brain on this before. Is of course the problem of evil. Now, I guess if you're a broad philosophical theist of a Neoplatonic sort, there's always going to be some sort of problem of evil in the neighborhood, right? But the Catholic and the Christian too has further claims and commitments that maybe wouldn't have bothered like the broad pagan Neoplatonists, and those are commitments between the intimacy that God is seeking with us, right? And this sort of invites or exacerbates certain, problems of evil, whatever you want to, whichever ones you want to, however you want to think about it, seemingly arbitrary or gratuitous suffering, divine hiddenness, stuff like that. Do you think that's right? Do you think that you have further issues or problems in that neighborhood as a Catholic that you wouldn't just have as a philosophical theist? And I'd like to maybe pick your brain about how you think through some of these, and what specifically you think Catholicism has to offer,
Sure.
if anything, on these issues, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think the sort of very robust view of providence that we have in the Catholic tradition raises a sort of deeper problem of evil. Now, certainly, again, like Neoplatonism and various forms of Hinduism have pretty strong forms of providence. But in Catholicism, it's been particularly emphasized the way in which God is involved in some way in each and every being and each and every event. Mm-hmm. So that leads, I think, to some sort of very specific problem of evil. If God was so involved in every event, how is it possible for evil to occur? How is it possible for human beings to reject God if he's so intimately present to everything that exists? And then furthermore, there's this idea that every single human being is called to divine union, and that God has made possible at least in some sense of possible, has made possible the opportunity for every human being to attain divine union. So again, we've got this idea that like if God is so committed to every human being's salvation, redemption, again, how is it possible for human beings to commit such great evils, and for there to be such terrible suffering in the world? So yeah, sort of the stakes are higher.
Yeah. That's kind of the fun thing that I noticed, fun or haunting, depending how you look at it when it comes to Catholic commitments, is like the church has never seemed to want to like try to dial down the 2 points that, when they come together, generate the tension. If anything, it ratchets it
That's
up,
right. Yeah.
right? Like insanely so, like between grace and freedom and providence and salvation and God's desire for all to be saved, but also the seemingly real threat that not all will be saved, right?
Yeah.
And the church is like, look, these are the truths. Jansenism is false. You do have free will, but divine universal causality. There you go. Right. And at least people like you, like, how am I gonna make sure this doesn't turn out to be a square circle? Right.
Yeah.
So you're terrified by that, or if you're like a philosopher who just loves working through tough stuff, like this should just be like exactly where you want to go. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like from a sort of scholarly point of view, it's like I've got work for my whole life. And,
roll up the sleeves.
Many lifetimes, I could keep working on these problems. It's great.
Yeah.
It's a very sort of rich view to work with. But yeah, it certainly leaves a lot of problems, and they're not just philosophical problems. I mean,
to be sure,
easy maybe for someone like me to just treat them like philosophical problems, but they're not. They're sort of existential problems, right? We're really talking about like, your and my eternal destiny,
right? Yeah,
purpose of life, and these sorts of things. The other thing that I want to mention in connection with the problem of evil is the place of suffering in the Catholic tradition. So one of the things I was mentioning before we started recording was that something I wanted to emphasize in this book was the centrality and the importance of not just the Catholic, specifically Catholic philosophical tradition, but the spiritual tradition, the ascetical and mystical and devotional and liturgical tradition. That, of course, this is central to Catholic life. And I think also provides us, if we examine various spiritualities, if we examine the liturgy, this provides us with access to aspects of the Catholic conception of God and access to sort of unique problems having to do with God that are sometimes underexplored in the philosophical tradition. And I think the sort of resources the Catholic tradition provides having to do with suffering are really central here. So in Catholicism, at least in a lot of strands of Catholic spirituality, because God has taken on suffering in Christ, suffering is now at least possibly redemptive, right? That is, through suffering, we can attain closer union with God.
Yes.
And this I think provides the beginnings of the possibility of a uniquely Christian solution to the problem of evil. That one of the central evils, suffering and death, have now become means to divine union. These things have been lived by a divine person. And if I participate in that person, these things can become means to my further union with God, which is not to deny that suffering is an evil or that death is an evil. These are real evils. And in some sense, like in an ideal world, they would not have happened. But now they have become possible routes to union with God.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is an extraordinary claim. And relating back to our earlier discussion about sort of the difference between Catholicism and Christianity and sort of these broader philosophical views, or philosophical Hinduism, philosophical Neoplatonism, classical theism, more broadly. A lot of these views have the view of suffering that ultimately the goal is to get away from suffering entirely, or to deny that suffering is real, right? To come to experience it merely as an illusion, or even during this life to attain the conditions in which one does not suffer at all. And Christianity strikes me as taking suffering much more seriously, in that it provides the conditions under which suffering can itself become meaningful. Right? That which is sort of intrinsically meaningless somehow is infused with meaning.
Yeah.
That's the divine person lived it.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And again, it's something that I have deep resonance with, because again, somebody who was, trying to find answers, if you will, in a lot of these Eastern traditions, I encountered, some of those strains of thought, and they seemed, I don't know, a little bit weird to me, to say the least. And I encountered Christianity, and I had like two, quite distinct feelings about it. I guess one is like, what the hell kind of bargain is this, right? Right. It's just like straight up. It's like, hold on, I'm like trying to get away from this stuff, and like you're telling me it's guaranteed, right? And that it might even and probably will be exacerbated if I sign on with this program, right? It's like, what kind of offer is this? But at the same time, there was just such a beautiful existential resonance of, no, like this, there's a spirit, like at the end of the day, like Christianity is committed to a spiritual cancer, right? There's a spiritual cancer that needs to be rooted out in us for us to attain this holy perfection in union with the Godhead himself, right? And that as either the best or only available means, God will permit these things in our life because he can defeat them, right? With and through our cooperation. So at once, for me, it was like this deeply haunting thing, but also this deeply beautiful and hope. And I still feel about that. Like, when I make my prayers, like every day, like, careful what you pray for, because you'll probably get it, but not in the way that you want to get it, type of thing. So I really like something like sometimes I'm very afraid, because I've been through those experiences, and like this is why I'm excited to talk to you about that. The more, I guess, I hesitate to use the term lived experiences because of the way it's used so much, but these are so true, where it's like, okay, I've studied all this stuff on paper, justification and grace and freedom, but then you live through these episodes, especially of suffering,
right,
where then they become demonstrated to you in such a profound way. They do take on that meaning that you're talking about, that of course deepens your faith and trust the love of God, but also kind of sets you up. Okay, was a little bit of nervousness, was that just like round one of chemotherapy for me? Like, how many more rounds do I need? Right. You see, like that there's a tension though, like the tension that I feel, at least psychologically, of like this great hope and meaning that Christianity offers, but like I think not being totally naive about what the path is at the same time. Love to just get your thoughts on all that.
No, I agree with everything you said, and I have that same experience of that tension. You talked a few minutes ago about how Catholicism sort of takes these different poles of different problems and sort of ratchets them up further. And this is a sort of risky thing to do. It's risky sort of theologically or philosophically, right? In that it can start to look like we're affirming contradictory or contrary claims. So a lot of work has to be done to reconcile these claims, but it's also risky, in terms of lived experience. It's risky existentially, right? In that, on the one hand, we want to say suffering really can be a route to growth in virtue, and it really can be a route to greater union with God. And yet at the same time, that can be abused in so many different ways. You can take on a sort of masochistic spirituality,
totally,
or a sort of macho. I'm just going to heap as much suffering on myself as I can and see how tough I can be. Right? And then you can do that to others as well, right? And this has happened, of course, lots of times, in which people do not alleviate others' suffering or even increase others' suffering out of a desire to sort of misplaced desire to help them.
Right.
So yeah, but at the same time, Catholicism, if it's going to be true to its tradition, is not going to pull back from these claims. Suffering really is a route to union with God. This was brought home to me in my own lived experience, I myself have not, I think, had any great suffering in life, personally, but my wife had Lyme disease a few years ago.
Oh yeah,
Um,
brutal stuff, right?
yeah, and she had it really bad. I mean, she like could not get out of bed. She had to be, helped or carried to the bathroom for like a month.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really bad. And she embraced this suffering. It was extraordinary. Right. Like I've read about this stuff in the lives of the saints, and I theologically justify it, but sort of seeing her live this out, this sort of embrace of suffering, praying through her suffering, joining it consciously to the sufferings of Christ, made it much more real for me seeing that, and certainly much more real for her. And she's written a lot about this since then. But seeing that, like that I think is a key part of the Catholic conception of God. And it has to be part of our philosophical and theological account of God, the way in which God enters into our sufferings. And even if we don't know anyone personally, like we can look at the lives of the saints, and they provide that revelation.
So you brought up a really interesting, thank you for sharing that. You brought up an interesting thing I'd love to get some of your further thoughts about. And that is, again, like understanding that, yes, suffering might be the best or only available means to facilitate our moral healing. And this is why I think it's so important that Catholicism isn't, the theodicy it offers is not soul building, it's soul healing, right?
Yes.
And that is a critical difference. Difference. I think it's a difference that makes all the difference between a successful versus failed theodicy.
Yeah.
However, you're right. Like our job as the moral agents that we are is not to put suffering on others, it's to alleviate it, right? That helps us in the healing. God is not a moral agent like us. And this is what I think is really important in the Catholic tradition is this distinction, right? So like what God permits or allows is really kind of irrelevant to what we are allowed to permit or allow. Mm-hmm. So like just because God might allow or permit this, like it is a fundamental category mistake to think that we should there permit or allow this, or let alone, heap it onto others. No, our job is to alleviate the suffering, and God will decide, when and if we are the instruments to which somebody's suffering is actually, completely alleviated or not. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's not our job to guarantee an outcome. It's just our job to follow the commandments and to alleviate the suffering of others, regardless of whatever God's doing, whose divine mind encompasses all the connections and reasons that are so far beyond us, right? So I think those clarifications can be really helpful to avoid some of the tensions that you pointed up. And maybe I'd love your further thoughts on all.
Yeah, no, I think that's all well said. And this is yet again a place at which Catholicism sort of affirms two claims and amps them up. Right. So on the one hand, right, we affirm a classical theist view on which God holds all things in his providence, and is bringing all things to the ultimate outcome that he desires, and that really will be best for all things. And so for that reason, God is not bound by the natural law. He does not have a nature like ours. We do not have an anthropomorphic view of God. And yet at the same time, God has become human, and so has showed us himself how to live this out, how to live out a divine life in a human way.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And so like in Christ, we have sort of, again, the ideal human moral agent as well. So I can see, like, I want to have union with God. That doesn't mean that I'm going to act like with the divine nature, because that isn't my nature and it never will be. But I can see how someone who has the divine nature, so to speak, translates that into human terms.
Yeah, that's a great connection. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a huge advantage in a sense. Like if that claim is right, then the sort of moral exemplarity that provides for us is huge. Much more than any saint or wise moral teacher could provide.
Yeah, I'm into that. Any other, if there's any other thoughts you have on that particular, obviously that's probably the biggest tension people think of between religion and God, is whatever is under the family of the arguments from evil, right? Otherwise, if you have anything else that you want to say on that, feel free. Otherwise, I'd love to turn towards the importance or the neglect, if you will, of various spiritual and devotional and even liturgical practices within philosophy of religion.
Yeah. So throughout the book, and especially in the last section of this element, I focus in on the importance of the spiritual tradition and the devotional and liturgical traditions. So I say towards the beginning of the book, I have a kind of a section where I ask, like, what is the Catholic conception of God? How do we get at what the Catholic conception of God is? And you might think that's hard to get at because Catholicism is so big and Catholics have said so many different things about God. And I think if we want to get at, like, what's the core of Catholicism conception of God, a place to look is the liturgy. Like,
Yeah.
how do we on a daily basis, not just as private individuals, but as the corporate body of Christ, right? How do we relate to God, and how do we speak of God and present God? And so I think looking to the liturgy, and not just to magisterial texts, which is not to downplay magisterial texts at all, but looking to the text of the liturgy and the way in which God is presented there is, I think, really helpful and really important if we're going to understand what do Catholics actually think about God.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we've talked a lot already about sort of the lived experience of these Catholic claims. I think they're, looking to the spiritual traditions of the church and looking to the sort of tensions between different spiritual traditions can really be helpful for understanding, again, what do Catholics really think about God? What do they really believe about God? And why do these various philosophical and theological problems that have been raised about God matter? So the big tension that I draw, that I see sort of running throughout the whole history of Catholicism, is between what I call here, and what has been called by lots of people, apophatic and cataphatic spiritualities. Right. So those spiritualities, the cataphatic ones, that emphasize the things that we can say about God, emphasize that God is knowable by us, is experienceable by us, does reveal himself sort of sacramentally in a small s sacramental way,
Mm-hmm.
through the physical world, and in a big S sacramental way through the seven sacraments. So emphasizing our positive experience of God.
Mm-hmm.
And then the apophatic spiritualities, those that emphasize our lack of knowledge of God, that everything we say of God falls short of who he is, that it's only by a sort of assent in which we set aside physical things and images and even concepts and words and propositions that we come to have a direct experience,
Right.
direct union with God, and that God even then is sort of beyond anything we could experience. We can never comprehend God.
Yeah.
And the Catholic tradition, once again, has sort of upheld both of these.
Yeah.
We have
Real quick, I mean, that just seems so right, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
God is like, that was, I mean, that at the end of the day, I think a lot about natural theology. I know you do as well, but that's really it. It's like, I need something beyond.
Yeah.
Like, otherwise, it just doesn't make sense, right? And I don't need to make sense of the thing that is beyond. I just need to see that, like, there is something beyond this system of obvious insufficiency, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is just sort of the heart of at all the fundamental claims for classical theism, right?
Mhm.
It really sort of just comes down to that. And then what you're kind of bringing out, especially between, I sometimes just call it like the negative and positive way, is like, yeah, a lot of natural theology can help us, form beliefs about God, but something that is often neglected, especially among philosophers of religion. Certainly, I've neglected this a lot of myself, and sometimes I get a healthy wake up call to get back on proper track. Is knowledge of God, right? Doesn't really come from a textbook of metaphysics,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We need that those other practices, like the stuff that's really going to form us or conform us, right?
Mhm.
That's not to say that natural theology and the abstract metaphysics aren't useful or can't facilitate certain things, but if you just stop there,
Right.
Massively incomplete, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there's a lot of emphasis in the church now about sort of having a personal relationship with Christ. And I think there's a lot that's rich there, but I think that sort of drawing on these older sort of mystical traditions, right? The sort of experience of unknowing, of going beyond all creaturely categories, right? These sort of more mystical claims. I think these are really crucial for us to retain, and they're crucial. I mean, even if we haven't, I mean, I certainly haven't had any like experiences of this, deep mystical sort, because you got to be a much more virtuous person than I am.
I'm still way down there on the
Right.
on that ladder.
But sort of knowing that those are experiences that people have, and also having sort of philosophical reasons for thinking, yeah, that would be the sort of experience one would need to have if one was going to have a direct experience of God. Sort of retaining that is important, as you say, as sort of a corrective to sort of the hubris that can come sometimes through philosophical theology, thinking that we've got it all figured out and I can prove out everything about God. So yeah, I want to hold on to that without losing any of the other stuff.
Where do you think, somewhat related to this, mystery? I want to talk about mystery, right? Because to me, as a philosopher, in some sense, mystery is annoying, right? We want to penetrate. We just want to know, right? But what the Catholic tradition tells us is like, look, reason is very powerful, but there are just some things that unless God, helps us directly, we're not going to be able to penetrate this, with just the natural light of reason. So there has to be there's always this, the very elements of mystery. It's not just one mystery. There's many mysteries in Catholicism, and frustrating as that was for me at first, it's something I've really come to appreciate over time. And I think appeals to mystery can be cheap, but one thing that I've because a lot of philosophers will appeal to like mystery or Mysterianism. You sometimes see it in like philosophy of mind with naturalism, right? And it's like, like okay, and then it brings up a question: if one person can appeal to mystery, why can't another? And then I would answer there, well, does one system actually predict mystery at certain points, and does another system not? And I think we actually have symmetry breakers there, but that's a different conversation. But to me, again, like mystery is almost a grounds for hope, right? Because I see this system, I see this world, and again, the notion of insufficiency, like if this is it, if we don't have some profound category shift into something which I have no idea how to even begin to try to wrap my mind around, I don't see how it all hangs together, or how it all comes together, or how it could be different in a way that I feel it needs to and should be different, if that makes sense. That was a horribly ambiguous series of statement I just made, but I'll let you clean up the mess however you want.
So I think, sort of experiences of mystery, experiences of a reality that transcends me and transcends all of my concepts, thoughts, propositions, and so forth, is really, really crucial. And this is why I want to emphasize the liturgy so much, because I think it is through the liturgy, at least when the liturgy is celebrated well, that we have this experience of mystery. I mean, St. Paul in the early church calls the Eucharist a mystery, right? Sort of appropriating language from the Greek tradition, right? They had these mystery cults, which were apparently, sort of experiences, things calculated, theatrical things to induce this experience of something greater than myself. I think that's absolutely crucial. And at the same time, the awareness that mystery here does not mean contradiction. So no matter how mysterious God is, in the sense of being beyond whatever I can grasp, if the Catholic tradition is right, then I think, be sure that at no point will I be required to affirm a contradiction. Right? I might be invited to affirm, statements that at first it's hard to see how they're compatible. But I have this sort of this confidence that they are not, in fact, incompatible. Right? Lots of people throughout the tradition have called God a coincidence of opposites. I think there's a lot of richness to that. But the opposites there are never contradictory opposites. So there's this sort of affirmation of mystery, but also at the same time, always an affirmation of reason. That this mystery is mysterious, is beyond us, precisely because he is supremely intelligible. And so there's, some of the old catechisms have this idea of, mystery is a a reality that is endlessly intelligible.
Yeah,
There's
I like
always
that.
more to understand, always deeper to go. But at no point will I be required to abandon the law of non-contradiction. Or
Right.
okay.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I've found as I've tried to avoid square circles in all this is that, and between the idea of Catholicism ratcheting up the tensions and thinking like, oh, why does the church have to say this? Why? Right? Like, there's an easier answer over here, right? But now I have to work through this. But
Yeah.
then what I realize is that as I work through it, I honest to God, right? I realized that easy answer was actually totally inadequate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It was cheap, it was convenient,
Mhm.
it was logically neat, but at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it was metaphysically absurd. I'll throw Molinism under the bus while we're here,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Right? There's a lot of stuff out there, right? And I'm not saying the church is condemn Molinism, but there's probably better examples out
We
there
can
where it's like
condemn
there's yeah there's just examples where like there are positions, at least, that seem initially available. It's like, oh, I could just take this and this, right? And then this problem wouldn't be here. And the church is like, no, you can't have that, and no, you can't have that, right? And then it's like, well, now look, it's like the Joker in the 1989 Batman. You see the tools I have to work with. But when we're forced to work through it,
Yeah.
so many riches and so much, I think such a deeper understanding of fundamental issues that you would honestly, that I don't think you would ever have even begun to probe at if you just stuck with what seemed to be the easier solution
Right.
before. Again, I'm not sure if that makes any sense. I'm just kind of talking ambiguously from the experiences I've had of being forced to try and work on stuff where, just because within the confines of people say dogma is a bad thing. It actually hasn't been for me. Like, it's forced me to work on things that I probably would never have worked on if I didn't feel like I was constrained by what the church commits me to. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all well said, and I think it also provides a real difference. Talking about the McGinn Mysterianism thing earlier in Philosophy of Mind, when we're talking about mystery in the Catholic tradition, we don't mean Mysterianism.
Yes,
we don't mean to sort of throw up our hands like, well, there's some reality here, and we'll never figure it out. We're too dumb. So the idea, is our on the classical Catholic tradition, our minds are participations in the divine mind. And so God really is intelligible to us, and these dogmas he's given to us are not just ones I have to take a blind leap of faith and believe, despite the fact that they're totally absurd and can never be made sense of. I will never make full sense of them, but I can always make deeper sense of them.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
Now, and yeah, I think that's the sort of richness of this idea of mystery. And precisely as you say, when the church proposes these dogmas, they're not sort of a stopping point for thought, like believe this and shut up. Though I had a theology teacher once who basically said that to me. But
I'm not a fan of that approach.
Tradition says, it's believe this because having faith in this will allow you to seek deeper understanding. Right? It's a starting point for thought, and you can go deeper.
Yeah, I'm into that. Okay, so wow, so much good stuff here. What's one more? Maybe we can just do one more. What's one more tension or problem that you consider in the element that you think it'd be worth just maybe briefly discussing and working through? And I just want to point out that you have a number of colleagues who've done a lot of work on like, I think of Matthews Grant. You've published up with him on divine universal causality and human freedom, and then I'm thinking of Tim Paul, who's done a ton of work on the incarnation. So if people are just looking like for deep dives into how do you make all this work, Mark's done a lot of work on it himself, and he's got a number of friends who are doing it there.
And my colleague Tim has a earlier Cambridge element on the incarnation.
Yeah, that one's really good too. Yeah. Give us one more that you've liked to think through.
Those two right there, sort of, those are my second and third chapters in the element here. So the second chapter is on Trinity and incarnation, and there I spend a lot of time talking about the sort of conciliar debates, the early conciliar debates about the Trinity and the incarnation, excluding the various heretical views. But that's not sort of the end of the story for Catholicism, right? There's this deepening of the account of the Trinity and incarnation through the Middle Ages and then into the modern period that I spend some time on, talking about how debates over the nature of the image of God in us and debates over the nature of personhood, which continue up to our current day,
Yeah.
shape the way in which we think about what it means to call God three persons, and what it means to call say God has one nature and three persons, or that Christ has two natures and is one person. These are sort of ongoing and live debates. And that, I think, also something I really wanted to emphasize here in the book is these are not sort of issues that just stopped, say, with Second Council of Nicaea. We continue to deepen our understanding. There continues to be the possibility of deepening our understanding of the Trinity and of the Incarnation. This work of delving further into the mystery and rendering it more intelligible continues even now.
Right. Yeah. I think I just read Stump's book, The Image of God. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something I wanted to emphasize is debates about, say, the image of God. Is the image of God something psychological in us? Is it a social reality? Between different persons. This is a debate that was there in the High Middle Ages. It's a debate that continues now. Depending on which route you go on that, it's going to shape the way you understand the relation among the three persons of the Trinity, and so shape your conception of God. There are dangers attendant on each one. Right? A social account of the image of God could tend towards a sort of tritheism, and an emphasis on the psychological image of God could tend towards a modalism.
Yeah, right.
Hail these, but that one could sort of be led in those directions. And so figuring out how do we understand the human person and how we image God, and how we understand the divine persons, these connect with one another and need to be understood in relation to one another. And then the third chapter, I talk about this business about divine causality that you were just talking about, and divine action. And that, again, is a debate that continues to be with us today. Right? You talked about Molinism a few minutes ago. When the Molinists and the Dominican Thomists were debating in the 1600s, the Pope at one point just sort of put an end to the debate and said, "You can both believe either thing, and we're not going to talk about this right now."
It's like Thanksgiving dinner, right? Just quiet down, right?
Yeah. Right. And that was probably prudent at the time, because there had just been the Protestant Reformation, and we didn't want yet another split in the church.
Yeah, right.
But now, that debate is kind of heating up again.
Yeah,
and it's a fruitful debate, if it can be done charitably.
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
a very fruitful debate, and there are other options too within the Catholic tradition on divine providence, divine causality. So what I want to sort of again highlight through this element is the Catholic conception of God is not just a sort of fixed set of propositions. There are, of course, things that we must believe as Catholics, but that the Catholic conception of God is sort of enlivened by these debates that are ongoing, and the tensions between the different sides of this debate, and learning to think in terms of those debates, learning to sort of live within those debates is, I think, quite fruitful, both for one's thinking as a Catholic scholar, and more importantly, for one's life as an intellectually informed Catholic who's really trying to live this out.
Yeah, and to all that, I would say, amen. These are invitations, opportunities for growth. They're not something to run away from or you get flustered about or anything like that. You have to learn to be patient. It's easy to get frustrated when you're thinking about hard, difficult things, right? But there's much fruit to be had from there. Okay, so I want to encourage people to obviously go pick this up. Like I said, the cool thing about the Element series is every once in a while they do just make a bunch of them free. I wish we would have done this. Do they ever tell you when they're going to do that sort of promotion, or just
they emailed me like the day that it
it's publishers always do that, by the way. But anyways, it's super affordable. So where's the best place for them to go grab a copy of this?
I guess Amazon or through Cambridge's site. You can pick it up there. I will say that I think the e-copy looks a lot better than the print copy.
I know we were talking about this before. It's true. These elements, I don't know what it is. They don't always look so great when they're printed. I don't know why, but it's the content inside that matters, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I you know, e-copy is better and I think more readable than the print copy. But yeah, Amazon or Cambridge, or you know, if you have access to a university library, you probably have free access to it there. A lot of libraries do.
Yeah.
So any of those.
But unlike a lot of, you know, philosophical texts, especially the academic ones that are often preposterously expensive, these do are, you know, quite affordable and very, very good. So I'm going to I'll link it. I'll find the link and I'll put it below in the comments so people can grab a copy of this. And again, like, no matter where you're coming from, philosophy of God is always important. I always enjoy just studying, you know, systems internally that I'm not committed to. I think it's always rich. So I'd invite people to check this out and see that these matters can be thought about very well, and how interesting they are, no matter what perspective they're coming from. Mark, before we say goodbye, remind us of some of your other work, some of your other books, and then what do you have coming up in the future?
Yeah, so I had a book last year that we've talked about on this program before, called The Irreducibility of the Human Person, a Catholic Synthesis, and that's through Catholic University Press. And this is a big synthesis of different views on the human person, trying to defend the dignity of the human person and a non-reductionistic metaphysics of the person. I'm currently working on a book on beauty. That's probably a couple years out, but again, that will be a synthesis of a lot of different views on beauty. And there specifically, I'll be doing some of this work, stuff we were talking about earlier, on relationships between Catholicism and other cultures, other religions. Like I've got some stuff on Hinduism and on Neoplatonism and other conceptions of beauty in relation to God in this text. So some of that work will be there. But that's what I'm working on right now.
Great. Well, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, there's a button on YouTube to do that. You should click it. And Dr. Mark Spencer, thank you so much. It's always a joy chatting with you.
Thank you. Likewise.